logical or philosophical assumptions. Fact number 2, on separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent German New Testament critic Gert Lüdemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3, the original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, despite having every predisposition to the contrary. Jews had no belief in a dying, much less rising Messiah, and Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead prior to the end of the world. Nevertheless, the original disciples came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to die for the truth of that belief. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar from Emory University, muses, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. And N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as a historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. Attempts to explain away these 3 great facts, like the disciples stole the body or Jesus wasn't really dead, have been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. Therefore, it seems to me the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by immediately experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, God was known to them as a dynamic will, interacting with their own wills, a sheer given reality. To them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is the case, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, God will make his existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. So in conclusion, we've yet to see any arguments that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. Together, these reasons constitute a powerful, cumulative case for the existence of God. Until Professor Slezak presents a better case for atheism, I think we can agree that Christianity is the more plausible worldview.
Thank you and good evening. In a sense, I should say I've been debating with Dr. Craig for many years now because, as was mentioned before, I give his excellent articles to my students as part of a course I teach at the university. So I've admired his work, and it's a privilege to debate with him tonight, and it's nice to be able to refute him in person. Not to mention the chance to convert an entire town hall full of Christians to atheism. I'll address Dr. Craig's specific arguments in a moment, but first I need to put things into perspective. I need to talk a little bit about the logic of proof and disproof in the context. The poster said that we're here to debate what the evidence proves, or where does the evidence point. If there were really any evidence worth taking seriously, we wouldn't be holding a public debate here in the town hall tonight. I mean, we're talking about evidence, and by that I mean the sort of thing understood by scientists or even lawyers. If there was any serious evidence, it would be in the scientific textbooks, or at least in the peer-reviewed research journals, and Scientific American or Nature. Even gravity waves or the Higgs boson, some elusive fundamental subatomic particle, gets to be discussed in the journals in Scientific American, though it's pretty doubtful at the moment. They're trying very hard to find it, but I think God is a lot less plausible than the Higgs boson. So if we're debating the question, where does the evidence point, I suppose I could stop right now, but I've still got a few minutes, so. I'd like to talk about the methodology and the rules of the game. This is what philosophers call the logic and methodology of rational belief in science. Now, as an atheist, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here tonight. I mean, I don't usually get up to give public lectures about all the things I don't believe and for which I don't think there's any evidence. And I mean, I could get up here every night arguing about UFOs, ESP, the list is literally endless. There's an important logical point here. Dr. Craig has posed the challenge to me as follows. We've just heard him say and ask the question, what is the evidence that atheism is true? What good evidence is there to think that God does not exist? And he says atheists have tried for centuries to disprove the existence of God, but no one has been able to come up with a convincing argument. Well, after centuries, perhaps tonight is the night. Dr. Craig's challenge is crucially misleading. There can be no disproof of God's existence in principle, but that doesn't mean the theist wins or that there's any reason to believe that God exists. For centuries, no one has succeeded in disproving extraterrestrial intelligence or UFOs. For centuries, no one has been able to come up with a convincing argument against ESP or a million other things one could think of. There's just a lack of evidence. How would you go about disproving all these things? Should you believe in all these things? So, admittedly, it's a bit odd to use the language of proof and disproof because God is not a mathematical theorem like Pythagoras' theorem. Outside of mathematics, proof can only mean roughly evidence and probable reasoning. So the best you can do for rationally justified disbelief or atheism is the lack of sufficient evidence. Disproof doesn't get stronger than that in science anyway. As we learned in our logic textbooks, asserting and denying existence statements are not symmetrical. To get slightly technical for a moment, if I was giving a lecture in logic, it would be because denying an existential statement or an existence statement is actually a universal statement, and you can't in principle verify universal statements about what happens everywhere in the whole universe. So we're dealing with evidence and knowledge of the world, and in this case there are only probabilities based on evidence, not certainties. Maybe you get certainties on Sundays at St. Barnabas. But as the philosopher David Hume said, a wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. So one interesting consequence of that is to do with agnosticism. It's why agnosticism is not warranted. Often in debates people think that agnosticism is rationally warranted because it seems like an honest, open-minded stance to say that you don't know. But sitting on the fence saying that you don't know is justified only when the evidence is equivocal, when it's balanced evenly. And of course you're not agnostics about lots of things. You're not agnostics about Spider-Man or whatever. Of course, in fact, in a certain sense, you understand my point because you're not agnostics, but atheists just like me, of course, about other people's gods. And for essentially the same reasons. It's just that I'm consistent and you're not. If Dr. Craig were from the Mexican school of Aztec theology, you'd all be on my side. And if he challenged you to disprove the existence of their serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, what could you do? I suppose you could have a debate in the town hall. Well, let me talk directly about the first argument, the cosmological or first cause argument, which Dr. Craig presented. He posed the question, have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Well, I suggest that if you have, you shouldn't have paid too much attention to the answer you gave. Your own common sense intuition is not the place to look. Dr. Craig relies crucially on what seems to make sense to you. Unquestionably, the idea that the universe popped into being uncaused and out of nothing doesn't seem to make much sense, and perhaps is the most bizarre, unimaginable and unpalatable idea of all. But have you ever asked yourself how empty four-dimensional space-time could be curved? Have you ever asked yourself how time could slow down? Have you ever asked yourself how the particles separated across the universe can instantaneously interact with each other, so-called non-locality in physics? Or how could they be particles and waves at the same time? Do you believe any of these weird things? Of course not. But who cares what you think? These are not from X-Files or Star Trek, but the most overwhelmingly established and empirically confirmed facts about the world. From physics, of course, and verified in recent times. Even the non-locality, which Einstein rejected, so-called spooky action at a distance, as he called it, he refused to accept it, though it has been experimentally verified. Quantum physics is so weird